Hi, thank you very much for your talk. My question is very short. What is the link between Trump's brand and white supremacy? Does the brand need racism, or does the brand produce racism, or some more complex dialectic?
That's a great question. So I think the brand is all about dominance, power over other people, right? It is not just about winning, it's about stepping over people as you win. You know, The Apprentice begins with a shot of a homeless person sleeping on the streets, and then a shot of Donald Trump in his limousine. And you know, the implicit question is, do you want to be that guy or do you want to be Trump? This is a world of losers and a small group of winners, and I'm going to teach you how to be a winner, right? So I think that absolutely the brand needs racism. The brand is about, and this is the Make America Great project also, is about lifting up a select group of workers, not all workers, right? A select group, mostly of white male workers, and the promise of restoring them to a position of dominance, right? And so part of this is about tapping into legitimate anger at the loss of job security, at the impact of trade deals, and a huge amount of it is also about mixing that in with basically just rage at equality, right? At the fact that people of color are becoming majorities in large parts of the United States, the fact that women are gaining more power in the workplace, about the fact that there was an African-American president. So it's all about restoring this small group into this winner category, right? Being part of the winning team in the reality show of life. And it's absolutely necessary to hold other people down, right? So taking away competition from immigrant workers, insulting black people, this is all part of this dominance project. So in terms of your question of, you know, does it need racism? Yes. Does it feed racism? Also yes. That, you know, Donald Trump isn't creating the racism, he's tapping into it. But by having the most powerful person, you know, the person occupying the most powerful office in the country, systematically picking fights with black athletes, you know, black journalists, you know, obviously what he said about Charlottesville, that they're good people on both sides, all of the flirtations he does with the KKK. This is creating an atmosphere of license, right? And unleashing waves of hatred that we're seeing manifest in many, many different ways.
Several other questions. Go ahead.
I have one here. Yep.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Do you consider alternatives to electoral democracy like sortition? And the second quick question is, do you consider alternatives to electoral democracy like sortition?
Sortition, I don't know.
Sortition is you choose people by lottery, for example. It's an ancient Greek system. It's an idea that has come up a lot recently. And the second quick question is, what do you think of a person like Elon Musk?
So in terms of like alternatives to electoral democracy, I mean, I think in most of our countries our systems of electoral democracy are really flawed, and we need much more participatory models of democracy. And I'm interested in all kinds of different models, and you know, ranked ballots and ways to capture more of the nuance in people's positions. I was starting to talk a little bit about the Leap Manifesto, which is a project that if people are interested in, they can read about in the book, and we include the manifesto at the end of the book, but you can also read about it online at theleap.org and look at the ways in which this attempt of movements to come together, map our own platform instead of wait for politicians to map it for us, to come up with it for us. One of the things that's been interesting about this is that it's really being picked up at the local level. in cities. I'm particularly interested in some examples of radical municipalism, like what's happening in Barcelona under Ada Colau. And we're working in different cities. Our Leap group is working in different cities where people are using it as a local platform to run candidates, so that an interplay between a vision that comes from below, but that eventually trickles up to an electoral expression and has a means to hold politicians accountable to a vision that comes in a very participatory process from below. So I'd really encourage people to look into that, because I know that you're at a point in this country where there is going to be a progressive coalition coming together to try to take on the right in this country, and it's extremely needed. But I don't think that movements need to take a passive approach about what are going to be the values that bring together that coalition, for instance, right? And wait for them to determine what is possible based on opinion polling, particularly on something like refugee policy, right? Where we know that politicians are generally incredibly cowardly, right? And they're just sort of following whatever the opinion polling is, instead of trying to change public opinion, right? Instead of actually engaging in a deep dialogue with the public, and speaking to people's better selves and seeing what's possible in that way. So Elon Musk just fired hundreds of workers at his Tesla factory for organizing a union. And Elon Musk has been found to buy solar panels from contractors who make their solar panels using prison labor, okay? And this is an example of climate injustice. And the whole reason why we started the Leap is because we know there's going to be major changes to our economy in response to climate change, right? We are eventually going to change how we get our electricity. Eventually, we're going to change how we move ourselves around. We're having arguments about timelines here, right? With the fossil fuel industry trying to waste as much of our time as possible so they can suck out the last remaining profits from the old model. But eventually, there's going to be a shift. But that shift will not necessarily increase democracy, increase economic fairness, increase justice. The only way that will happen is if we fight for it, right? And I think Elon Musk really shows us frankly, what an unjust climate transition would look like. It would be busting unions, it might use prison labor, and it shows that if we want the transition to renewable energy and to electric vehicles to be fair, then it's going to take a social movement that's going to fight for that. And that's what we've been trying to do in really building alliances between trade unions and environmentalists, and food justice activists and urban planners and migrant rights activists to come up with a coherent vision for how we change our economies very quickly, but do it with justice at the center. That is not something that's going to happen through trickle-down economics, and once again, no, our billionaires are not going to save us.
I'm looking at the organizers to see if we have time for one more question.
I gave 2 long talks, I'm sorry. How about if we take a couple questions and I'll give really short answers?
2 more?
Yes, no.
Okay. You mentioned the pussy grabbing incident, and in some ways we've seen a real revitalisation of gender and women's rights this year. Could you maybe talk to what the future role of women will be, and perhaps could we have a comment about what's happening with Weinstein?
Great. Can we take another question? I will answer that, but maybe just to get a few more voices in.
Hello. I've just got a quick question about economics, really. Don't you think it's really imperative to have a democratic control of the people over the economy in order to deal with stuff like climate change and everything? So we need a complete different electoral system and more like a roots kind of electoral system in order to deal with the problems we face now and to deal with the economic problems and the climate crisis and everything like that. Thank you.
Can we hear from one more person?
I've got perhaps a small question regarding after the disappointing Democratic primaries and election in the US, there was the perhaps also disappointing election in France, where the neoliberal. Macron was hailed as the savior after a victory over Le Pen, and afterwards Macron was just destroying several social institutions. I was wondering, how do you stop the supposed, like you said, lowering the bar over the right politicians, like the far-right politicians? How do you stop this, the centrist right politicians as the supposedly new saviors, while they're destroying social freedoms? How do we respond to that?
Yeah, okay, these are all great questions.
So women, the two-party system, grassroots, and France.
You know, I think Macron is playing with fire, you know, and this idea that it was some great victory, right, against the Front National is absurd, right? They've been steadily gaining ground. To gain 30% of the vote is absolutely terrifying. And I think that in the way that Macron is confronted, and the way you know, other European neoliberal politicians are confronted when they impose brutal austerity, has to very clearly say, you are creating the soil in which fascism grows. And we know this from the history of this continent, that when you have these punitive economic measures and a sense of national humiliation, this is precisely the conditions in which Nazism grew. And there's this huge irony to me that some of the institutions that were created, like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, that were created in the aftermath of the Second World War in order to prevent economic shocks, because there was an understanding of the interplay between punitive economics and the rise of the far right, you know, are now the institutions that are so complicit in pushing governments to impose brutal austerity. So all I can say is I think what Macron's doing is incredibly dangerous. And I think we have to all do a better job of connecting the dots between that type of neoliberal economic program and the conditions under which the far right rises. And of course, more urgently, we need to build the real economic alternatives, right? We need to build the economic program that speaks to people's legitimate needs, does not prey into those illegitimate feelings of a loss of power over other people, but does restore a genuine power over people's lives. And this comes back, I think, to the question about economic democracy. And this is, you know, another core principle of what climate justice means as we change our economies. Is this is an opportunity to fight for a much more democratic economy. That as we transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy, we have to simultaneously be fighting for community-controlled renewable energy projects, energy cooperatives, thousands of them. I mean, the beautiful thing about renewable energy is that it is everywhere, decentralized. It does not need to be controlled by a handful of small players, but there are a handful of small players that are trying to control it, right? So we need to fight for energy democracy, and we need to fight for, in my opinion, energy reparations, which means that the communities that have borne the brunt of our addiction to extraction, whether in poor countries or in our own countries, in immigrant communities that have the dirty industries in their backyards, need to have the resources they need to own and control their own renewable energy projects. So part of this means climate financing, which is something that 11-11-11 fights for and not enough organizations fight for. But you know, this is all part of, you know, what I believe is the opportunity of our century, which is to seize the reins of this great transition that needs to happen in order to safeguard human survival and the life systems on which we all depend, to build a much more democratically controlled and decentralized economy that's much fairer and that has reparation and justice at its center. You know, what we have now is an economy that is all based on dominance and based on taking without reciprocity. which brings us to pussy grabbing in a roundabout way, because I actually see this as deeply, more and more, I think that we need to draw the connections between a mindset that believes it has a right to grab the resources of the world without asking through sheer might. You know, Donald Trump likes to say, well, we should have taken Iraq's oil, you know. This is his big criticism of the Bush administration. They didn't take enough of Iraq's oil. He likes Rex Tillerson because he just goes around taking people's oil, as Donald Trump said. And this idea that if you are, you know, if you're a powerful enough man, you know, whatever industry you're in or whatever your political affiliations are, that part of power means the ability to just take whatever woman you want, and indeed part of showing that you've made it and expressing your power is, you know, is abusing women in this way, right? And I think we are in this moment where we are seeing that, you know, that form of male dominance, and indeed that form just of dominance itself, like that this is the way you really know you've made it, whether in some sort of small petty arena or some grander arena, whether it's Hollywood or whether it's the White House, that this is a primary way in which our society encourages people to show that they truly have power. I don't think it's about sex. I think this is all about power, and we see that it crosses all political affiliations. This is the great uniter, right, between left and right. You know, the entertainment industry and politics and literature and every single field you can name, right, it is filled with men who believe that whatever domain they've managed to get power in, they can express their power by abusing the women around them. And you know, I think part of this should challenge us to really dig deep when we think about what our political alternatives are. This is really about a profound shift in worldview, in narrative, in the values that govern our societies. It's not just about changes in policies, right? It is about the fundamental change in the way we relate to one another and to the planet itself. And we are bound within a system that is based on taking without limit, based on, you know, might makes right, whether it is our relationship with the planet or whether it's our relationship with other people. And we have to change that model to one that is based on care, reciprocity, regeneration, all of these sort of softer feminine ideas that get dismissed. When we wrote the Leap Manifesto, the subtitle of it is for a Canada based on caring for the earth and one another. And you know, we really see this as deeply interconnected with all of our dominance-based relationships, including rape culture. So I hope this somehow answered all of these terrific questions, and I know many people had questions they didn't get to ask, but it was a real privilege to talk with all of you today. And thank you for all of your work and holding the line and fighting for a more progressive, more humane, more generous and decent future for your country. Thank you.